Good morning, class. Our lecture today will be about hearing aids and cochlear implants. This is the last part of audiometry. By definition, audiometry is incomplete without hearing rehabilitation of the hearing impaired. So this hearing rehabilitation is done via using hearing aids and implants, not just cochlear implants. There are other kinds of implants as well. This is going to be a direct, straightforward class. There's not much to understand. It's more of mechanical and technical details. So beginning with this lecture, these are all the types of hearing aids and implants we will be discussing through the lecture. So beginning with the hearing aids, the regular hearing aid. So all the questions from this chapter are either 2 marks or 4 marks questions. There hasn't been an essay so far, but at PG level, cochlear implant is an essay. So you might have to look out for that. So hearing aid is a device used to amplify sounds reaching the ear. Simply, it's like a mini speaker. A hearing impaired patient needs auditory rehabilitation for better communication. Auditory rehabilitation includes not only instrumental devices such as these hearing aids, but it also includes training. So what is this training? This can be in the form of speech reading. So that is more like lip reading. It is useful in high frequency loss and in patients who have difficulty in hearing in noisy surroundings. So they understand the speech by reading the lip. Then there is auditory training. This is mostly done for children or patients who have received cochlear implants or hearing aids so as to get a hang of how to use these devices. This is an audio verbal training. Then there is a speech conservation. So in patients with profound hearing loss, they lose the ability to monitor their own speech production. It's because they are unable to hear their own voice, so they tend to speak a little more louder. Okay, so they are taught as to how they can conserve their speech and speak in a way that the other person is able to understand. So the types of hearing aids are air conduction hearing aids and bone conduction hearing aids. The air conduction hearing aids again are of 3 different types: analog, digital and hybrid. So analog is like a regular speaker. So here the sound is picked up by your microphone. It is amplified and just sent to the receiver into the ear. So there is no frequency control. Any kind of sound given is amplified directly. This frequency control, you cannot say that it's not there completely, but there is a very limited frequency control. You can either make it low or high. That's it. Okay, you cannot specifically change the amplification for specific frequencies. Whereas in a digital type of hearing aid, the sound is picked up, this wave is converted into a binary code, into a numerical. So this binary code for each frequency of sound could be different, and this can be altered so we can delete the frequencies which we do not need, such as the frequencies which cause noise in noisy backgrounds or feedback. Feedback is nothing but when you give some sound to a hearing aid, the microphone picks up the sound, then the processor or your amplifier amplifies it and gives the sound through the receiver. So when the hearing aid is a little ill-fitted or it's not completely tightly fitting in the ear, some amount of sound leaks through your receiver. This leaked sound is again caught by the microphone and it causes some unusual and disturbing sounds or screeching noises to the patient. So this is a feedback. So instead of a one-way microphone to receiver sound, the sound is again picked up by the microphone from the receiver, whatever has leaked, and it produces some screeching sounds. So this feedback and all these kind of frequencies can be digitally removed in a digital hearing aid. Hybrid is again, it modifies the operation of analog components in the single processing stage. So there is a mix of both the analog components and your digital components. The next is a bone conduction hearing aid. So what are the parts of your air conduction hearing aid? Air conduction hearing aid, simply the amplified sound is transmitted via the ear canal to the tympanic membrane. Simple. It uses your basic air conduction mechanism. It consists mainly of 3 parts. A microphone which picks up sound and converts them into electrical impulses. 2, an amplifier which magnifies the electrical impulses, and 3, a receiver which converts your electrical impulses back to sound and transmits it through the tympanic membrane. This amplified sound is then carried through the ear mold to the tympanic membrane. So receiver is a part of a hearing aid, whereas your ear mold is the fitting which sits in the ear. So through the ear mold, this receiver sends sound into the ear. Next is a bone conduction hearing aid. So here, instead of a receiver, we have a bone vibrator, which snugly fits into the mastoid and directly stimulates the cochlea. So we know this is the mastoid process. So this bone vibrator is in contact and it fits onto the mastoid and it directly stimulates the cochlea, meaning it bypasses your entire external ear and middle ear and directly goes into the inner ear. So indications of bone conduction hearing aid are, it is useful in patients with actively draining ears, such as in chronic suppurative otitis media, in otitis externa, in an open mastoid cavity post-mastoidectomy, or in congenital deformities such as atresia of the ear canal, where ear inserts cannot be worn. So the types of hearing aids again, there are different types. The first one is a body worn type of hearing aid. Here, the microphone and amplifier along with the battery are in one case and it is worn at chest level, while the receiver is situated at the ear level. Okay, so this is the picture. This box consists of your microphone and your amplifier. This sits in the chest level, mostly in the pocket. And this wire is like an extension cord, and this is your receiver which sits in the ear. So this type of aid allows higher degree of amplification with minimal feedback. Why minimal feedback? Because the distance between your microphone inside this part and the receiver which is in the ear, the distance is too high. So whatever sound, excuse me. So whatever sound leaks from your receiver through that distance cannot be picked up by your microphone. So it cannot cause much of feedback. It is useful in severely deaf persons or children with congenital deafness. It is rarely used now because of its huge size, cosmetic issues, and the close rubbing against the microphone in this chest piece cause unusual sounds. It's not like the feedback, but still there is some rubbing sounds in the ear, so it is not preferred nowadays. The next is behind the ear type. Here, the microphone, amplifier, receiver, and battery all are in one unit, which is worn behind the ear by a hook-shaped ridge tube that fits over the auricle. So see, this is the tube which consists of all the three parts. It is coupled to the ear canal through a soft polyethylene tube and an ear mold. So even the receiver is in this part, so it is coupled or attached or transmitted. The sound is transmitted into the ear through this polyethylene tube, and this is this ear mold. This is the part which fits in the ear canal. It is useful for mild to moderate cases of hearing loss, particularly the high frequency ones. So this is how it is inside. There is a microphone, there's an amplifier, and there's a receiver. This is the battery fitting. This is your polyethylene tube, and this is your ear mold. This is how it sits in the ear. So features of a hearing aid, it has a on and off switch for battery conservation, you can say. So the patient removes it at night and turns it off before sleep. So then there is a volume control switch, and there's also a tone control. So tone control is used to modify frequency characteristics of the amplifier. Okay, these hearing aids have a very minimal way of changing these frequencies. So this will be when in the mode of a normal frequency, the normal frequency response of the instrument is produced. When it is set on the high frequency range, only the high frequency will be amplified and there is no effect on low and mid frequencies. But when it is set or marked on the low frequency range, there is amplification of the lower frequencies, whereas the upper frequency amplification is reduced. So these are the parts. This is your volume control. This is your on and off switch. There is a tone hook, and this is your battery compartment. Next is a spectacle type of hearing aid. It is a modification of the behind the ear type. And the unit is housed in the auricular part of the spectacle frame. So see, this is the spectacle and this is the hearing aid. All the parts are within this rim or your auricular part of your spectacle. It is useful to persons who need both eyeglasses for vision and a hearing aid. It is not very popular now. Next is in the ear type, ITE. So here the entire hearing aid is housed in an ear mold which can be worn in the ear. It is useful for mild to moderate cases of hearing loss, and it is very popular because of its cosmetic appeal. So again, this is commercially available since 1960 and it has 3 different variations. So variations are in the shape of the hearing aid. It could be a full shell, low profile, or a half shell. So full shell is where it fills the entire concha portion of the outer ear. See, this is a full shell. Entire concha portion is filled. A low profile, it fills the inner portion of the concha from top to bottom, but does not protrude outwards as much as the full shell ITE. So this is a low profile. Yes, the protrusion is a little less than a full shell one. Next is a half shell. It fills only the lower half of the concha. So this is nothing but the concha region. Okay, this area is the concha region. So this is a half shell. It fits only up till here. Next is the canal types. The hearing aid here is so small that the entire aid can be worn in the ear canal without even projecting into the concha. Yes, so concha is a part of your pinna, whereas ear canal is a part of your external auditory canal. It's the same thing. So for using this aid, it is required that the ear canal should be large and wide. Otherwise, this hearing aid cannot fit inside. And the patient should have the dexterity to manipulate the minute controls in the aid. So the aid itself is so small, it needs to be manipulated with 2 fingers by the help of a polyethylene tube to even insert and remove it. So if that is so difficult, the controls will be even smaller. So the patient should be able to change the control. So he needs to have a good amount of dexterity. This is useful for mild to moderate cases of hearing loss of high frequency. So these are 3 types of in the canal canal type of hearing aids. So in the canal, within the external auditory canal, completely in the canal, it is still smaller and it is invisible. It only has a clear filament protruding outside from the ear to help remove the aid. Okay, so this is the first one is in the canal. This is completely in the canal. Can you see this tiny filament here? It's not very visible in the picture, I believe. So this tiny filament is used to place the hearing aid inside and to remove it again. So invisible in the canal is the 3rd type, and this uses a 3D printer to create a particularly required shape of a hearing aid for that particular patient's external auditory canal, and it is completely hidden inside the ear. So it is the tiniest possible hearing aid. A little bit on the expensive end. So the next part is your indications for hearing aid. Any individual who has a hearing loss that cannot be managed by medical or surgical means is a candidate for using a hearing aid. So in sensorineural hearing loss, we use it when it interferes with day-to-day activities of a person. This is what we see in presbycusis. The hearing aid may not suit all such persons because of the presence of intolerable distortion of sound in some patients, particularly in those with recruitment. So when there is a cochlear type of hearing loss, when there is recruitment, sometimes these hearing aids are not very tolerable. In cases of conductive deafness, these persons can mostly be managed by surgery. But when the surgery is refused, not feasible or failed, or the patient has any comorbidities, then the second option to use here is a hearing aid. Next, a deaf child. So preferably in a deaf child with some amount of remnant cochlear hair cells, we usually prefer a cochlear implant. at a particular age limit. So a deaf child should be fitted with hearing aids as early as possible for the development of speech and learning. So when a child cannot hear, he cannot develop speech. Yes, in severely deaf children, binaural aids, that is one for each ear, and individually fitted are more useful. So coming to the fitting of a hearing aid, we need to take into consideration certain parameters. So that will be the degree of hearing loss, mild, moderate, moderately severe, severe and profound. We have this classification. So you need to know the degree of hearing loss. Then you need to know the configuration of hearing loss, which frequencies are more affected and which are not. So in cases of, okay. Next, the type of hearing loss, again, could be a conductive hearing loss or a sensorineural hearing loss. So this type needs to be known. You need to know the presence of recruitment, that is the function of the cochlea must be known. Your uncomfortable loudness level, we have seen this. This is the intensity of the sound which is not tolerable by the patient. Yes, so you need to know this loudness level. Again, you need to know the age and dexterity of the patient. So you can come to a conclusion whether the patient is capable of using the hearing aid correctly or not. And then the condition of the outer ear and the middle ear to know which type of hearing aid to use. The next will be to choose the type of hearing aid the patient is willing to use. Again, a cosmetic component is present, so the patient's wishes, cosmetic appearance should be considered. Type of ear mold, because this has to be worn through the day during the wakeful hours. This ear mold should be comfortable to fit in the ear. The material should not be causing any allergic reactions nor causing any compression so as to cause pain. Yes. So the type of fitting can also be considered monaural in 1 ear, binaural in 2 ears, and binaural with V connection. 1 aid is present, but 2 receivers are present. 1 for each ear, just like your earphones. And your cross and bicross type. And also your post-fitting counseling. So coming to this cross and bicross type, what is cross? Contralateral routing of signals. Okay, these are 2 marks questions again. So in a cross, in this type, the microphone is fitted on the side of the ear with hearing loss. And the sound is picked up and is passed to the receiver placed in the better ear. So contralateral routing of sound signals. So how do you do that? The sound picked up from the deaf ear is routed to the receiver of the normal ear. So this is a contralateral routing of signal. This is useful for persons with 1 ear severely impaired and helps in sound localization coming from the side of the deaf ear. Next is a bicross. This is a bilateral contralateral routing of signal. So if the better ear also has hearing loss, okay, there will be the presence of 2 microphones. So microphone 1 will be in the deaf ear, microphone 2 will be in the less deaf ear. So both the ears have some amount of hearing loss. The acoustic signals from both the sides are delivered to a single amplifier, and receiver and the output is then directed into the best ear. So in a cross, from the deaf ear microphone, sound reaches the receiver in the normal ear. Whereas in your bicross, let's say the right ear has better hearing and left ear has even worse hearing. So you place a microphone, 1 in each ear, and the sound is amplified by a single amplifier, and entirely the sound reaches the right ear, which is comparatively the better ear in this patient. This is a bicross. So this is what we were talking about. 2 sets. So in children, the hearing aids should be provided prior to 6 months of age to maximize the language acquisition. So when a patient is unable to hear, like we have spoken previously, the patient will be unable to develop speech and language. So because of that, we use hearing aids, mostly behind the ear hearing aids in both the ears, even in profoundly deaf children, so as to give them a chance of developing at least minimal speech. Okay, the next is your Assistive devices. So assistive devices are not exactly completely hearing aids, but they assist the patient in doing their regular activities. So assistive listening devices and systems, alerting devices and telecommunication devices. These are your assistive devices. So assistive devices and systems are usually used for alerting the patient to external stimuli. Like let's speak about your uh, alerting devices. So see, you must have seen in many movies, profoundly deaf patients tend to have a vibrator or something attached to the table or the bed. So this vibration shakes the bed in such intensity that the patient tends to wake up even without hearing anything. So this is somewhere attached, let's say, to the doorbell. So when somebody rings the doorbell, this vibrator starts to vibrate the bed, or when it's attached to some watch or something, it starts to vibrate that particular surface. So the patient is alerted because he already knows that this vibrating device is attached to the doorbell. He can go and open the door. Same telecommunication devices again. In telecommunication devices, the phone is fitted with an amplifier. This is specifically for the deaf person. So no matter the amount of intensity with which the opposite person is speaking, this patient, when he picks up the receiver, can hear the sound louder. Okay, so these are assistive devices. They are not exactly hearing aids, but they assist the hearing impaired to have a better quality of life. So these are different kinds of your assistive devices. So this is the telephonic device which we were talking about. And sometimes even these assistive devices can be fitted with the television so as to increase their reception to television volumes. Okay, so the first, again here we have come to the alerting or signaling devices. So like we have seen, they could be in the form of flashing lights or vibrations. So they produce an extra loud sound signal or relay the signal to an area close to the individual. The next is your implantable hearing aids. So to avoid cosmetically visible aids, implantable hearing aids can be totally or partially concealed under the tissues around the ear. So this is the meaning of implantable. So that means it takes the need of a surgery. Yes, the transducer of the aid is coupled directly to the ossicular chain, malleus or stapes. And these devices, which are still in their developmental stage, are of two types, which we use mostly are your bone anchored hearing aids and MET devices, that is implantable middle ear hearing aids. Bone anchored hearing aids and your implantable middle ear hearing aids. So the advantages of these implantable hearing aids are they offer a better acoustic gain. Okay, acoustic gain is nothing but the difference between the sound intensity given to the patient as a stimulus and the sound intensity received by the patient from the receiver. So the difference between both of these is an acoustic gain. Then there is also no feedback. Okay, so there is no leakage of sound from receiver and being picked up by microphone. This does not happen. There is a lower battery consumption and it is particularly useful in conductive hearing losses, congenital or acquired, which are not amenable to surgical correction. Okay, they are also being used for sensorineural hearing losses. So the first implantable hearing aid we are going to talk about is the bone anchored hearing aid or your BAHA. So BAHA is a type of hearing aid based on bone conduction. Okay, so usually what we are using right now is a hearing aid system currently manufactured by Cochlear. So how does this BAHA work? It works by collecting the sound from the outside, bypasses the ear canal and the middle ear, and directly stimulates the inner ear via your bone conduction. Okay, it has been in use since 1977. So this BAHA itself is a 4 marks question. So the components of BAHA are 3. There is a titanium fixture, a titanium abutment, and your sound processor and vibrator. So titanium fixture or the screw is surgically embedded in the skull bone, and this osseointegration usually takes 2 to 6 months. Yes. So this is your titanium fixture or your screw. This part is implanted within the tissues in the bone, and for this to become a part of the bone, or for the bone to form around this surgically created area of deficiency, it takes usually 2 to 6 months. Okay, this is the titanium fixture. The next part is your titanium abutment. So this is your titanium abutment. It is fitted to the titanium screw, which is already integrated to the skull bone, and it remains outside the skin. This is completely hidden, whereas this remains outside the skin. And the last part is your sound processor or vibrator. It is attachment to the abutment after completion of osseointegration. Screw, titanium screw, abutment, and your sound processor and vibrator. So what are the indications for the use of bone anchored hearing aid? So it is used in patients who are not benefited by using behind the ear, in the canal, or completely in the canal aids. Yes, for the reasons of these hearing aids having more acoustic feedback. When there is a repeated occlusion of external auditory canal with wax, these cannot be used again. A ear mold skin reaction. Like we have spoken, the material of the ear mold in some patients could cause allergic reactions. So these patients cannot use these hearing aids, and hence they will have to use a BAHA. Then also discharging ears where insertion of ear molds is a problem. It can also be used in congenital anomalies. In patients where the previous standard hearing aids cannot be used because of conditions such as microossia. Yes. Then bilateral canal atresia. These conditions, you cannot place a ear mold inside the ear. In cases of otosclerosis and tympanosclerosis of patients who are not fit for surgery because of comorbidities or age, and or are unwilling for the same procedure. It can also be used in unilateral profound deafness in patients who cannot benefit from using a regular hearing aid. So here the BAHA is fitted to the deaf ear, sound transmitted through normal ear through bone conduction. So we know that, like we have seen, bone conduction completely transmits to the other ear also. So bone conduction in a deaf ear can transmit to the opposite side. So if you fit a BAHA to the deaf ear, this bone conduction, whichever is being caused by this device, will be transmitted to the other ear, and through the other normal cochlea, the patient will be able to hear. So what are the requirements for a BAHA implant? The patient should have adequate bone conduction thresholds. So you will do a pure tone audiometry. It has been suggested that the bone conduction threshold should be at least 45 decibels or above for effective functioning of BAHA. Below that, it usually cannot function. A preoperative speech audiometry should be performed in all patients before BAHA implant. So you need your speech reception thresholds and your speech discrimination scores before a BAHA implant. So what is the implantation procedure? The surgery is performed under a local or general anesthesia, preferably general anesthesia. The bone posterior superior to the ear canal is usually of sufficient thickness over the age of 3 years to take an implant and allow osseointegration. So posterior superior area above the ear canal over the age of 3 years is a prerequisite for your BAHA. So in adults, mostly a single stage procedure is preferred. Bone over the skull, just posterior superior to the ear canal, is drilled and the titanium screw is inserted into it. A 2 to 6 months period is allowed for osseointegration to take place, and after that, the abutment is introduced onto the screw. The ear level sound processor or vibrator can be then attached to the abutment. So this is how it is done. behind the ear canal in a posterior-superior area. You mark the space, you create the opening, elevate the soft tissues, create a flap, yes, and drill the bone. On the bone, you fix your titanium screw and the skin is again replaced and sutured. Okay, so this is how it is present. So this is your titanium screw, this is your abutment, and this is your sound vibrator processor. So when the sound hits this causes bone vibration. See, it passes throughout the skull, and even if this ear is profoundly deaf, through the bone conduction, it can reach the opposite cochlea. Yes? This is how it looks. This is the posterior superior region behind the ear canal where a Baha is fitted. So this part is removable. The rest stays. So what are the complications of a Baha insertion? The complications are failure of osseointegration. That is, this screw is not integrated into the skull bone. It is rejected. Then there could be infection at the level of your skin flaps or subcutaneous tissues. Then there could be crusting and inflammation. Crusting is usually dried secretions, and inflammation again is redness and pain around the area of the Baha. And during surgery, there could also be injury to the dura. When you are trying to drill through the skull and make a place to put in a titanium screw, what could happen? You could injure the dura by mistake. So this can again lead to infections such as meningitis, which is, these kind of complications are a little rare when it comes to Baha. So what is the care you should take after a person has had a Baha implantation? You have to clean the area around the abutment daily. Do not allow any hair to wrap around it, wrap itself around the abutment. Do not keep hot air from a hairdryer on the abutment for a long period. The hair should not be allowed to grow under the processor. Whenever strong chemicals such as hair dye solutions are being applied, cover the abutment and skin graft site with plastic to protect the skin and the abutment from the chemicals. Baha should be removed before undergoing an MRI imaging, again because it is metal. For best benefit, it should be worn throughout the day except for while sleeping. And during windy conditions outdoor, the directional microphones may pick up the wind sounds. So you have to simply rotate the processor on the abutment 90 degrees or turn it off until the wind sound stops. This is your Baha care. The next are your middle ear implants. The first published report of an implantable hearing device was by Wilska in 1935. How did he do that? He placed small pieces of iron on the tympanic membrane and a coil within the ear canal, a magnetic coil. So this coil created a magnetic field which in turn caused the iron and the tympanic membrane to vibrate. So this was the earliest middle ear implant. Obviously, we are not using it now. So the devices or the types of middle ear implants we are using today are either piezoelectric or electromagnetic drivers, and they can be partially or totally implantable. Okay. The partially implantable systems use a microphone with a speech processor and a transmitting coil that are connected to the internal or the implanted device. So this is a partially implantable, where a microphone, speech processor, and a transmitting coil are in the implanted device. The driver converts the electrical energy to mechanical energy, and the driver is connected to the incus or the stapes. In a totally implantable device, a microphone that is placed under the skin in the middle ear or in the external auditory canal. This microphone is connected to a speech processor that converts sound energy to an electrical signal. So the driver, which can be connected again here to the incus or the stapes, connects the electrical signal to your mechanical vibrations. So the current middle ear implantable devices which we are using here are these. Most commonly, this MET device has been a question. Again, your vibrant sound bridge also happens to be a question. So this vibrant sound bridge, it is the first partially implantable electromagnetic system to have received an FDA approval. It is a direct drive of electromagnetic type, and it has a floating mass transducer that is attached to the incus. So middle ear implantable devices means literally a part is implanted in the middle ear. So this FMT device is attached to your incus. The sound bridge has two major components. So there is a warp, a vibrating auricular prosthesis, and an external amplification system or the audio processor. So this warp or your vibrating auricular process which is implanted consists of a receiver, a conducting link, and a FMT device, a floating mass transducer, which is attached to the long process of incus. Okay, all these are just technical stuff and mechanical parts which you have to remember. There is no other way. Okay. So here you can see, yes, you have a receiver, a conducting link, and an FMT device. So these are the parts of your warp. These are implanted: receiver, conducting coil, and an FMT device. These are the three parts of your warp. Whereas your external amplification system or the audio processor is the outer part which is attached. So this is a partially implantable type of device. So what are the selection criteria for using these middle ear implantable devices? The age should be more than 18 years. Okay, it can be used in a stable, moderate to severe sensorineural hearing loss, not in types of fluctuating types of hearing loss. There should be a minimum speech recognition score of 50%, and the candidates must have failed an adequate trial of your conventional hearing aids, the regular behind the ear or in the canal type of hearing aids, and they must have normal middle ear function and no history of chronic middle ear diseases. So how do you implant this warp? Techniques and approaches are similar to cochlear implantation, and they involve a tympanomastoid surgery. So you do a simple mastoidectomy. You had this class of mastoid surgeries taken by our HOD sir, Dr. M.V. Apparao sir. So you do a simple mastoidectomy and then do a facial recess approach or a posterior tympanotomy. So you are entering into the middle ear through the posterior wall of the middle ear. Yes. So after that, you place this floating mass transducer on the long process of the incus. Okay. Then this incision is again closed. 8 weeks post-operatively, the external audio processor is fitted magnetically behind the ear and it is activated. So this is how you fit the warp. Okay, this is the opening of your facial recess. Yes, this is your incudostapedial joint. Yes, so this floating mass transducer is attached to the long process of your incus. This is the long process of incus. Okay, so you attach it to your, see, this is the long process, it turns and becomes attached to the head of the stapes. So you attach it to the long process of the incus. So this is about middle ear implantable devices. Next and the most important topic is your cochlear implants. This is the picture of a cochlear implant, which you can see, which we'll be discussing in detail. So cochlear implant is an electrical device indicated for patients of profound binaural sensorineural hearing loss. Yes, profound binaural, that is more than 90 decibels hearing loss in both ears, who have intact auditory nerve functions and show little or no benefit from conventional hearing aids. So even patients who are being taken up for cochlear implants, a hearing aid trial must be done just to give them a chance to develop whatever minimal speech or language they can develop. Okay. So why do we need to use this implant? What does this implant do? It bypasses the damaged hair cells and stimulates the cochlear nerve directly. Okay. So it has to bypass the damaged cochlea and stimulate the cochlear nerve fibers directly so as to cause an action potential which goes through your auditory nerve directly. And it also utilizes the residual hearing. So some functional hair cells could be present, and this residual hearing is also utilized by cochlear implant. There is a need of some functional hair cells for the production of hearing sensation in a cochlear implant. So this is the cochlear implant system. These are the parts. So there is an external component and there is an internal component. Yes, this is the implanted component and this will be your external component. So the external component of the device consists of, this part consists of a microphone which collects the sound, converts into electrical signals and delivers to the speech processor. Yes. It also contains a speech processor, which is a part which modifies the signal and delivers it to a transmitter. And the next part is your transmitting coil. This is secured over the mastoid to the magnet in the implanted portion of the machine. So this part consists of your microphone and your speech processor. This part is your transmitting coil. You can see here, this is the transmitting coil. This is your microphone and speech processor. And this transmitting coil delivers signal to the implanted receiver via FM radio frequency or magnetic coil. Okay. So your internal or your implanted part of your cochlear implant consists of a receiver stimulator or a multi-channel electrode array. See, don't get confused between a microphone and a receiver. Receiver, the patient receives the sound, whereas microphone picks up the sound from outside. So microphone, processor and a transmitting coil are your external component, whereas your internal component consists of your receiver and an electrode array. So this receiver stimulator, it has a magnet and an antenna. It is placed under the skin. It decodes and further modifies the signal and delivers it to the electrode. So this is what it does. This wire-like structure which you can see here, this is your electrode. So this multi-channel electrode is placed into the scala tympani through a round window cochleostomy. It has multiple channels, each channel specific for particular frequencies, and this stimulates the remaining cochlear nerve tissue, usually the spiral ganglion cells in the cochlea. So how does this implant work? Okay, the sound is received by the microphone, reaches the speech processor. This speech processor analyzes and digitalizes sound into coded signals. And through the transmitting coil, it is sent to the receiver. Yes, the receiver of the internal implant which directs current pulses to appropriate electrode array, which lie close to the auditory fibers within the basal turn of the cochlea. So, sound picked up by microphone, modified by speech processor, transmitted to the transmitting coil, goes to the receiver, and from the receiver it goes into the electrode array. This is the electrode array. These are the tiny electrodes. So this current which has passed through this electrode array excites the auditory nerve, and these signals are finally recognized by the brain. So there are certain criteria for patient selections for cochlear implants. We use this in patients of congenital deafness, in acquired profoundly deaf, more than 80% decibels loss, in postlingual deafness. Postlingual means the patient already has some speech and language. Acquired profoundly deaf child with normal cochlear development, in prelingual deafness, that is where the language has not been developed. The best time to do it is between 2 to 4 years. Okay, this is the best time of your learning curve in a child. So that is the time to do it. The next is your patients of postlingual profound deafness caused by meningitis. Okay, these patients are a very bad candidate for cochlear implant because meningitis tends to lead to new bone formation. So this new bone formation, irrespective of whether there is a presence or not presence of a cochlear electrode array inside the cochlea, tends to obliterate the cochlea. Okay, so if there was an obliteration already, the insertion of electrode becomes difficult. But even after implantation, if we do happen to successfully do that, sometimes it can lead to cochlear obliteration at a later stage and failure of the device. Yes, so prelingual is where there is no developed speech or language yet. So in this patient, it's better to intervene before or under the age of 5 years, best in 2 to 4 years. Postlingual could be of any age. These patients could have lost hearing due to trauma or conditions such as surgeries, etc. So there is a particular list of preoperative assessment or investigations to be done before doing a cochlear implant surgery. So you need to know the history of the patient and do a complete examination. This is for your medical fitness. Is complete comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, okay, any other congenital conditions should be known so that you can give a proper prediction of your expected outcomes so you don't just raise the hopes of the patient unnecessarily. Then we do a list of audiological investigations, all the tests which we have studied in audiometry, precisely, more importantly, pure tone audiometry, speech audiometry, tympanometry or impedance audiometry, autoacoustic emissions and BERA need to be done. Radiological imaging such as the CT and MRI of the temporal bone and brain is required. So of the temporal bone to look for the presence of any abnormalities of the temporal bone, developmental or acquired, such as your Mondin's dysplasia, there could be the presence of an enlarged vestibular aqueduct. So these two conditions where there is a less number of turns of the cochlea or where the vestibular aqueduct is wide, these are not contraindications for cochlear surgery, but there could be complications during the surgery. Like as in cases of vestibular aqueduct enlargement, you can have CSF gushes during the surgery. So that is a problem. Whereas in cases where there's a cochlear aplasia, that is absence of the cochlear nerve, or auditory aplasia, absence of your auditory nerve, or an ossified cochlea in cases of meningitis, this surgery cannot be performed. Then again, we need to do a hearing aid fitting and performance test prior to the fitting of a cochlear implant. Okay. This is also called as an aided audiometry. It's nothing but audiometric tests done after using a hearing aid in place. Then you do a speech and language evaluation. So you need to know the level of speech and language development of the patient, and you need to know the presence of any articular disorders. Yes, so if you know the deficits of speech perception in particular frequencies, then what you can do, you can necessarily program the implant at that particular frequencies. You also need to do a psychological evaluation so as to know the cognitive and mental disabilities of the patient other than the hearing loss. And also because we drill the bone and literally place the implantable part over the dura, you have to give the patient a preoperative immunization of Haemophilus influenza B, pneumococcus and meningococcus vaccines. So these are the requirements. These as a question, it can be given to you as a pre-op assessment for cochlear implant, or it can be under your investigations for cochlear implantation. So what are the basic criteria for implantation of these cochlear implants? So you need to have an audiologically appropriate candidate. That means you will have to take a look at the levels of hearing loss. Usually we do this in patients of profound hearing loss, more than 90 decibel patients. Radiologically, you should see that there is a presence of a normal cochlea. That is, there is no ossification. The cochlea does not have any congenital deformities. And there should be a presence of eighth nerve. So this will be known in your MRIs. Okay, auditory nerve should be present. The patient should have family support, motivation and appropriate expectations. So though they do happen to get a cochlear implant, their speech will not be completely normal. So there should be realistic expectations. And most important of all is the presence of rehabilitation facilities. So it takes over years of auditory verbal therapy, etc., for the patient to actually get the hang of how to use this device and how to get the best outcome of having this implantation procedure. So what is the surgical procedure? The surgical procedure for cochlear implantation, it is done under general anesthesia. It is done in supine position with head turned to the opposite side. We do a post-oral approach and very rarely end-oral approach, that is through the external auditory canal. We will be first discussing the post-oral approach. So we do a flap elevation in 2 layers. The first layer will be that of skin and subcutaneous tissue, and the second layer of mucoperiosteum. So when you elevate one flap in this direction and the other flap in the opposite direction. So when you close, there is a 2-layered protection. Okay, an implant bed is created on the temporo-occipital bone to house the receiver stimulator. Whatever is the implanted part, to house that you create an implant bed, a pocket. It is also called as a well. Okay, it is created under the second flap. Then after doing a proper mastoidectomy, you do a posterior tympanotomy, just like we have done for medullary implantable devices. You do a facial recess approach to visualize the round window. So this is, we've done a mastoidectomy. This is a posterior meatal wall. You do a facial recess approach. You are drilling this. And for end-oral approach, the surgery which is done through the ear canal without the post-auricular incision. Like in a case of a myringoplasty, you raise the tympanomeatal flap, you expose the round window, you drill in the area of round window to expose it and make it further. Yes, so you can drill a tunnel directly in the bony meatal wall through the external auditory canal, and an electrode array is passed through this tunnel in the posterior meatal wall. Same way through the round window again into the cochlea. This is a Varia technique. This is done for end-oral approach. But what you are mostly concerned with is your post-oral approach. So next we do a cochleostomy. Once you have visualized the round window through your facial recess approach, you widen this round window. How do you widen it? The area antero-inferior to the round window in the basal ton of cochlea is widened using a Skeeter drill. This is a cochleostomy. Then you insert the electrode array. So I have widened the round window. I have made a cochleostomy opening. Then I will insert the electrode array. This is the electrode array. These are the electrodes. So where do I insert this? Through the round window opening into the scala tympani of the cochlea. I will insert it until the last electrode has completely reached inside the cochlea. Yes, this is the electrode. I'm using a forceps here to introduce it into the round window cochleostomy. So next you do, you close this cochleostomy opening with the help of fibrofatty tissue. And then in the well you place and stabilize the receiver stimulator. So see, I have, after raising 2 flaps, I have created a well inside the bone. So this is the well I have created to fit this part, receiver stimulator in the bone. So I place this receiver stimulator in the well and I stabilize it with the use of ties. How do I make these ties? I make drill holes and crisscross, as in stitching. You just place these ties so as to hold it in place. So after this test, after the cochlear implant has been completely implanted, before suturing, you do electrophysiological tests. That is to check whether your electrode is completely in place or not. So to determine this, you do a electrode impedance test, and telemetry responses are also checked. We do a post-operative radiological imaging, more often done after the flap closure, but it is mentioned a little early here. The view we use is a modified Stenber's view. So these 2 flaps are closed in 2 layers, and post-operative care has to be taken, keeping the area clean, dry, free of hair, etc. Suture removal is done after 10 to 12 days. and mapping or starting of this implant is done after 2 months. So after the entire replacement of your cochlear implant, there is requirement of rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is teaching the patient how to get the best use out of this cochlear implant. This is through your audio-verbal therapies with the help of audiologists, speech therapies, support of your family members, teachers, and social workers. Okay. There are different kinds of complications of your cochlear implant surgery. Early could be a facial nerve palsy during surgery, during the facial recess approach, rarely. Alteration of taste due to the irritation of the chorda tympani, postoperative bleeding or hematoma formation, wound dehiscence of flap necrosis due to infections, early device failure, something to do with the mechanical device, a CSF leak if there was a breach in the dura during drilling the well for the implant, vertigo or dizziness if the stapes or the incus has been unduly touched, or the drill touching the incus also during the surgery can cause some amount of vertigo and dizziness, and sometimes even sensorineural hearing loss in a normal patient. Then there could be meningitis again with injury to the dura. So late complications again will be extrusion or exposure of the device due to flap necrosis or wound dehiscence. There could be neuralgic pain in this region, device migration or displacement because of improperly fixed ties or loosening of the ties. Late device failure, again mechanical problem, and there could be an otitis media because we have opened the middle ear, some amount of infection or any kinds of otitis media can occur in the ear. So the last is your auditory brainstem implant. So auditory brainstem implant directly stimulates the cochlear nuclei in the brainstem and bypasses the auditory nerve. So hearing aids normally pass the sound to the cochlea, then to the nerve. Your cochlear implant passes sound directly to the nerve, whereas the last resort is your auditory brainstem implant, which directly passes sound to your cochlear nuclei itself. So it is bypassing even the nerve. It is indicated in patients of bilateral auditory nerve lesions. In cases of bilateral acoustic neuroma present in neurofibromatosis type 2, where the auditory nerve is severed during surgery. In children born with cochlear nerve aplasia, in cases of traumatic cochlear nerve avulsion, or in cases of unsuccessful cochlear nerve implantation. So this device is placed in the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. The multi-electrode array of the Nucleus ABI, the company, is attached to a Dacron mesh that is placed on the brain stem. Okay, so this is how it is placed in the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle with the help of Dacron mesh on the brain stem. The facility of removable magnet of receiver or stimulator makes the device MRI compatible. This helps in communication, awareness, and recognition of environmental sounds, and its efficiency is not similar to cochlear implants. Though it is not similar, it can still be used, it can still give them some sound perception. So it is where something is better than nothing kind of a situation. Yeah. So this is the end of the lecture. With this, we have completely finished entire part of audiometry along with your hearing aids. Please go through it, and you can ask me doubts in the next class. Thank you.